It is my absolute pleasure to be hosting this event. I think it's a very underrated topic, Armenian genealogy is. People don't realize the importance of researching their roots, and sometimes it's not, or at least not until it's sometimes too late, in my case. Um, Although in another sense, I feel like it's not too late. Anyways, I will allow our genealogy expert, George Aghjayan, to do the rest of the talking on that subject. George Aghjayan is the director of the Armenian Historical Archives and the chair of the Armenian Revolutionary Federation Central Committee of the Eastern United States. Aghjayan graduated with honors from Worcester Polytechnic Institute in 1988 with a Bachelor of Science degree in actuarial mathematics. He achieved fellowship in the Society of Actuaries in 1996. After a career in both insurance and structured finance, Aghjayan retired in 2014 to concentrate on Armenian-related research and projects. His primary area of focus is the demographics and geography of Western Armenia, as well as a keen interest in the hidden Armenians living there today. Other topics he has written and lectured on include Armenian genealogy and genocide denial. He is a board member of the National Association of Armenian Studies and Research, NASR, a frequent contributor to the Armenian Weekly and Hushamadian, and the creator and curator of Western Armenia, a website dedicated to the preservation of Armenian culture in Western Armenia. Mr. Aghjayan, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Arman. We got to trim that bio back a little bit. It's not all needed. Listen, today, I think the focus of this, I'm hoping to go about 45 minutes, and I'm going to try and be pretty good about that. That's my hope. And that way we can have some time for question and answer and still keep it within an hour and 10 minutes, something like that time frame. So I can't get into, I'm not going to go into tremendous detail, although I'm going to give examples. But the overarching thing I want you to think about, the real message I want you to walk away with today, okay, is why this is important for Armenians in general, for our people, not for you individually necessarily, but for Armenians in general. Why is this important? And I want to open your eyes to what's possible. I want to break down some of the misconceptions that exist. And I just want to open your eyes to what potentially is possible for your family or for other families, what can be done in Armenian genealogy. So those are the two things: why it's important, and how to go about doing it. So I'm gonna run through a PowerPoint presentation here, and we'll talk. And then afterwards, if you have questions, I'll let Arman decide how he wants to do it, whether chat or verbally. It's not so many of us that it can't just be done through verbally if you want, or chat so it's up to you. But let me get started so that we do this in a timely manner. Oh, so, okay. Oh, I didn't realize I did this slide this way. Okay, look, the why. There's a couple of I'm going to just kind of show the different things here, but look, some of it is really simple stuff. It's not complicated. Why should we be worried about our family histories? Why should we be interested in Armenian genealogy? It's it's the mundane. It's why not? Or in my case, I started doing genealogy because it was when my wife and I were first expecting children, and I was thinking I wanted to be able to answer their questions when they would ask them, that I would have answers for them, or at least the best answers I could supply. It's not that I wasn't interested before that. I knew Armenian history very well from a very young age. I've always been interested in it. I grew up here in the United States, so I'm born and raised in the US. My parents were born and raised in the United States as well. It's my grandparents that had been survivors of the genocide. So I always knew general history, very passionate about it, but I didn't always think of the role my family had in that history that I knew. I didn't know my family. I never thought about the fact that that history I knew, my grandparents actually lived it. My great-grandparents actually lived it. It's kind of like saying, knowing about, the American Civil War or the American Revolution without actually thinking about the fact that your family members may have participated in that. So So though, that's kind of where I was at. There are also, I like mysteries. If you like mysteries, each one of these things is like a little mystery you're trying to solve. And that challenge, that intellectual challenge can be stimulating. So you can find some, you know, uh, some interest from that. Um, of course, you can be, you want to honor, in our case, you want to honor your parents, your grandparents, the experiences they had. Um, uh, and uh, if you think about how, let me see what this, I'm just trying to think of how my slides go here. Okay. Um, of course, their experiences, the trauma that they experienced in their lives, you want to be able to honor that, not that they wouldn't be forgotten, that the family members that were lost during the genocide or other, other trauma in your families, that you haven't forgotten the lives they led, and that you're honoring that. And you want to connect to the stories of your ancestors. So you want to, have some ties to them. It's also a fight against assimilation. If, in my experience, doing, of 20, 30 years of doing Armenian genealogy, um, that you can reach people within the community that are grew up outside an Armenian community center or Armenian community life. They've grown out of it. Maybe they have only one parent that's Armenian or one grandparent that's Armenian, and they haven't really been exposed to that you can reach them, and you can uh, they can expand their relationship with their Armenian heritage by your help in them learning more about their family history. Let me put it that way. And the most important thing in my mind, and the reason why I devote so much energy, when you think about that resume you spoke of, for me, why would somebody like me be so involved in something like this? And for me, it's about fighting that continued crime against our people today, and even more so now. It's evident when you think about the war in Artsakh and the destruction that's taking place even since the end of that war to our cultural heritage, to the people that lived on those lands, the Armenians that lived on those lands, that this is a crime that is continuing, hasn't stopped. And for me, when you repair that rupture in our family history, you're fighting against that crime. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that on this slide. So if you think about identity, and as an Armenian living in the diaspora, your Armenian identity, what ties you? What are the ways? How do you look at yourself? What defines you of who you are, right? And each of us has many identities. It's not simply one identity. A lot of times people think of things like in singular form, that there's only one identity, and that's not the case. We each individually have many identities. We're Armenian because we live here in the United States. We're American. Maybe we're Christian, or where our identity has a strong sense tied to the religion, our religious beliefs. Of course, there's gender. Your role within your family, right, defines your identity. That you have brothers, sisters, whatever, parents, your personal interests, whether you're interested in sports or music or jobs, whatever it is, that is part of your identity. That defines who you are. Uh, your self-perception of who you are, not simply the perception of others of who you are, but your self-perception of who you are. And maybe you have other backgrounds, other ethnic backgrounds. Maybe you're not entirely Armenian. Maybe you have Italian or Irish or some other Greek or some other ethnicity in your background, right? So that also is part of your identity and helps define you. And there's different ways you view yourself, different ways people perceive you, this kind of identity, your self-identity. At different times, you may, uh, you know, accentuate one part over another. Maybe in some environments, maybe you don't feel comfortable, highlighting your Armenian ethnicity or Armenian identity. Maybe you are more apt to highlight your American identity or some other part of your identity. Um, and if you think about this in the context of, we're thinking about this in the diaspora here in the United States, or if you were born in Hayastan or Artsakh or someplace else, how that might be different, right? versus what it might be here. And we have to be cognizant of that because every Armenian's experience as an Armenian is different. Okay. Their relationship to their identity as an Armenian is different. So let's think about the Armenian community in Turkey. Okay. Just like for us, Armenian is only one component of their identity. They would be a Turkish citizen as opposed to an American citizen. Maybe they have other ethnicities as part of their background, family background as well. Maybe they have Turkish, maybe they're part Turkish or part Kurdish as well. So they're going to be, as we say, we're Armenian American, they're Armenian Turkish Armenians or Armenians from Turkey, however you want to view that. Maybe they've grown up Muslim as opposed to growing up in the Armenian church or apostolic faith, or even as a Christian, whether it's Catholic or Protestant Armenian. And for them, in their family, very likely or very possibly, they have both victims of the genocide and perpetrators of the genocide in their family history. And if you think about the psychological trauma that inflicts on somebody, where they know that maybe their grandmother was victimized during the genocide and their grandfather or their grandfather's family was the perpetrators of that victimization to their family. Okay. Think about that. Also, again, thinking about when you highlight your identity, in the case there, they have over 100 years of learned behavior that being identified as an Armenian is not safe. Okay, so this is part of the crime that has been committed against our people. Okay, this is part of why these sorts of things are important, is to repair that rupture. And at the end of this whole thing, I'm going to explain why this is important in a real example. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about genealogy, the misconceptions. So one of the misconceptions is particularly Western Armenia, but not just Western Armenia, because Armenia, look, there's trauma that's bridged all of our Armenian communities. And if the last year more than ever can highlight that, whether it's Syrian Armenian community, the Lebanese Armenian community, now Hayastan and Artsakh, the trauma that's been inflicted, it has not been a good couple of years for Armenians wherever they've lived, right? So we think about the fact that it's thought that all the records have been destroyed and that there's nothing more that can be learned. And what I hope to show here is that while yes, the great majority of records have been destroyed, not all the records have been destroyed, that there are still things we can learn about our families. And quite honestly, we bemoan the fact that records have been destroyed and that everything was done during the genocide. We're not preserving our records today. The records we have today, we're not preserving, and that needs to be done as well. But over the last decade, with the onset of things available through the internet and remotely, there's been a huge explosion of what's possible. And there's two primary things I want to talk about in the US context, but this also bridges beyond the US context. The first one I listed here is the Armenian Immigration Project, which is a project of Mark Arslan, and he has developed a database where he's culled Armenians from records that are contained in general civil records that are contained in US archives and that sort of thing, as well as some records from Armenian newspapers and things like that that he's culled and he's put into a database, okay, which is really a tremendous resource for those families that have been here for a long time, let's say, or for a good number of years. If your family came here prior to 1930, this is a great database to be used. Now, regardless of that, the Armenian Genealogy Facebook group is a fantastic, fantastic resource. It has over 15,000 membership worldwide, everywhere. There's people there, and they have expertise. So there's people in Hayastan that are part of this group, in France, in South America, in Lebanon, in Greece, everywhere. There are people that are part of this group. And when you ask a question, you're gaining a resource of people around the world that are willing to and really desiring to help you learn more about your family. There's been a lot of work that's been done in the transcription of records, but there's still gaps in information we have. And when I go through, when I'm showing you some of the major gaps we have, is the records of the Armenian church records from France and the Armenian church records from Iran are two of the major places where we don't have, there's not a central repository where a researcher can go and look at those records. In the case of France, obviously it's a really important post-genocide Armenian refugee community. In the case of Iran, it's a centuries old Armenian presence there that ties the traditional Armenian homeland to the Southeast Asian communities. And there's a really rich heritage in Iran of the Armenian presence there. So having access to that would be really useful as well. I'm working on both, but right now we don't have those. And then what I want to show here as well in the way of capabilities and possibilities is how all these records that are available, when you put them together, it really broaden, gives greater depth to the family story you're putting together. Okay. So some of these resources I'm talking about: the Armenian Immigration Project, the Armenian Genealogy Facebook group, looking to form a society. We've been doing these annual conferences, but in the way I want to mention also FamilySearch.org. FamilySearch.org is similar to Ancestry.com, except FamilySearch.org is a free website. And if your family came from, has roots in, say, Hayastan, Georgia, Artsakh, those areas, there's a lot of that information has been scanned already, digitized on FamilySearch.org, and you can access it from anywhere in the world through a free account. All you have to do is register, and it's free to use. So you have records on not just the church records from Armenia and Georgia and those areas, but you also have some of the records of repatriation in 1947 and 48 from different communities of those that repatriated, and that's online. And if you're thinking about some way that you might want to contribute to this effort, might want to help others more broadly beyond just your own families, one of the things I would like to see, and I'm working on, is setting up a project to transcribe those records, the Armenian records that have already been digitized on FamilySearch.org, so that once they're indexed, transcribed and indexed, people would be able to search across that database more easily, as opposed to doing what I do, which is to go through these records individually. This is just an example of why, even if your family wasn't you didn't grow up here in the United States and your family hasn't been here long, maybe they immigrated from Egypt or Lebanon or Iran or Hayastan, that it still can be of use to you. If you know, for example, that your family came from a particular village, one of the queries that you can run on the Armenian Immigration Project website is a query where you'll see all the records for those that identified a particular village in that record that's being culled. Okay. So I pulled up an example of my grandfather's village. My maternal grandfather was from the village of Sakrat in the region of Palu. And this is all the records that pop up. It's not, I mean, the list goes on. I'm just showing you the top of it here. But as an example, there's a naturalization paper for this Tatios Manuk Baboyan, or Babayan, or whatever. He groups things by a standardized name as well. But anyways, it's and so he, on that naturalization paper, this Tatios shows that he was from this village Sakrat. So if you know where your family came from, you can run this query for that village, and you might find family members or relatives that may have come to the United States, even if your family didn't. If through the dispersion of our people, let's say in my case, right, my grandfather, this grandfather in particular, this grandfather, Geragos de Manuelian, was my grandfather. His brother's family ended up in Hayastan. They repatriated in 47, 48. So my cousins live in Hayastan. If, for instance, they didn't know their family in the United States, but they knew that their family was from Sakrat, they would run this report, and they would have seen all these Dermanuelians that ended up in Rhode Island, in Providence, Rhode Island, that they would be related to. So that's one way that this database can be of use. So looking at Armenian church records as an example of what you can find beyond just the sacraments, which are the most common thing people think of: baptism, marriage, and funeral. also sometimes you find a gem like this. This church, Armenian Church of Our Savior in Worcester, Massachusetts, is the oldest Armenian church in the United States. And in going through their records, it didn't show up in the catalog. This is through FamilySearch.org, through their library at the in Salt Lake City. There's the Mormon Church archives. These have been microfilmed, and looking at it in going through these early baptisms, I found this census that was done in 1929. And why is that significant, that census? First of all, it's before the split in the church here, so it includes the entire Armenian community, so that makes it more useful. Second of all, if you think of 1929, those early immigrants that came over, they would have been alive in 1929. So that's what makes it valuable. But if you look at this record, this is for Garabed Tashjan, his wife Alavni, and then their three children, Magardich, Mariam, and Margarit. And what you'll see here is where they're from, Kharpet. The kids were all born in Worcester, but Kharpet is the parents. Maybe it was a village, we don't know. It could be the city or a village. But then it lists their parents' names. So Garabed's father's name is Magardich and his mother's name Miriam, of course, his age. So you see here, he named his son Magardich after his father, very common. So in the case of this couple, who were clearly married in the old country, the only time you would find the reference to their parents' names would be at the time of death. And at that time, they're not the ones supplying the information. So this record is tremendously valuable for the sake that it might be the only place where you're going to find the parents' names of these early immigrants. On top of that, even better, in the case of Alavni, where it lists her parents' names as Bedros and Tervez, it also lists her maiden name, Baldigyan, where you might be the only place you would find her maiden name. So these sorts of records are really valuable. You come across these, and this isn't just in the United States, by the way. I'm just using this as an example, and I'm comparing it to the civil census record from 1930, so you can see the difference in the quality of information and why both are valuable. In this case, you see Garabed Tashjan. This is the way they transliterated the last name. Alavni became Agnes, right? Magardich becomes Michael. Of course, Miriam and Marguerite is the name is the same, so you don't see a difference there. The other thing you see here is the age at first marriage. So they had been married 19 years, so you get that. And if I went across this record, you would have also seen when they immigrated to the United States. So you can see, have this sort of information. So it gives you that kind of why both can be valuable. So this is an example of another census that was done in 1906, 1907 in Cairo, Egypt. Again, an Armenian census. Here you have it. The Worcester census was organized alphabetically by the first initial of the first name. So Asador, Tashjan, whatever, would be listed in the first group. That's how, so you'd have to know the first name you're looking for, or you have to go through the entire census. In this case, in Cairo, Egypt, it's organized by last name. So you see Abkarian here and all the Abkarians that are listed. And then you see Miran here, and then Haruchun, and then Haruchun's wife, Harapsame. And then you see here, her maiden name is shown again, which is very, very useful. Not only that, it shows, again, where they're from, Tiflis. So this person, even though it's a Cairo record, you're learning something about families that came from someplace else. Tiflis, Sepastia, Manisa, Sepastia again, Constantinople or Bolis. And then you see here, it tells you when they immigrated to Cairo, Egypt. So it gives you a sense of that. So again, very useful sorts of information beyond just the sacraments. Again, I'm not talking too much about the sacraments because we all understand a baptism record, a marriage record, and those values. Here's an example of a refugee census from 1923 from Greece. And look at this marvelous pictures that were included as well. So you get the name of the person, Donig or whatever, Hovanesyan, and probably Hovanesyan not isn't even the surname. Again, there's a whole different discussion about Armenian surnames that we need to have about when you're trying to research your Armenian family history. But you see his father's name is Hovanes, which immediately makes me suspect about what his father's, like what his father would have been known as. His father might have been known by a different name. Maybe his father's name, 90% of Armenian surnames are patronymic. The rest are occupational based or geographic based or physical characteristic. And those surnames were not in your families. No matter how much you love your family's surname and you're like attached to it, it probably was in your family very short amount of time. Okay. And they didn't change it for any other reason than a surname is a more nuanced way of referencing a person. Which Hagop is it? Hagop, the son of Melkon, in this case, the son of Hovanes, right? That's in a small village, that's all that's needed is what your father's name was. In a bigger village, maybe they started to say, well, Hagop the butcher, Kasabian, or Hagop the blacksmith, Demirjan, right? Or son of that, or Keshishan, the son of the priest, and then, or maybe Hagop moved someplace else. Like maybe he was from Kharpet, but he moved or Palu. Say he's from Palu and he moves to Kharpet, right? So then he becomes, which Hagop is it? Hagop that came from Palu, Palulian, or Hagop that came from Marash, Marashlian, or maybe it's Lame Hagop. He's son of Lame Hagop, Topal Hagop, Topalian, or something like that. Or Six Fingers is a very common, is a name that you'll see, right? Altabay Makyan, Six Fingers. So this is, but anyways, this record, you get that sense of where they're from, Bursa, age, and then, parents' names, again, very useful. And then the photographs, which makes it really, really wonderful. This one, I didn't even know what was at the end, because when I looked at the microfilm, this was just the image was just all black. It was just like, it was like this upper one where it was just simply black. And you see the census. Again, this is a census from Greece that was done in the 1920s of the refugees. When I changed the resolution in the coloring, all of a sudden these pictures came out, and that's what was contained. And I've never seen this anyplace else. This is the only time I've ever seen this, where they've pasted little photographs of the person next to the record. Really, really interesting record. Greece, really important. The records from Egypt and Greece, Lebanon, Syria, post-genocide, really important records. Wherever your family was from, it's important. Here's an example of, you'll see somebody that I believe is related to me that my family didn't know about, but because of where he's from, where he lists he was from, Gesaria, and my family was from Yozgat, Gesaria area, and his last name being Aghjayan, which is a very uncommon Armenian last name. I believe this person to be related to me, and in 1948, he was repatriating to Soviet Armenia, okay? Or attempting to. I don't believe it ever happened, but he tried. Penny Amin, son of Sarkis. Okay, this is France. The repatriation records from France are very rich. You can see it here. He lists his children's names, the years his children were born. Right, Georges, Jacques, Roger are the children's names. 4 sons. I almost believe that one of these sons has to still be alive, but I haven't been able to track them down. Maybe this Jacques is a Hagop. I don't know. Maybe this George is a Kevork. I don't know. But there's a bio here. There's a bio that was included. Very interesting, and it shows that his mother, who also repatriated, was from Yozgat. So again, this is why I think so. Really, kind of rich record. And when you look at this picture, truthfully, he looks exactly like a cousin of mine. I mean, really spitting image. So again, it's probably a relationship. So let's think about the Ottoman archives and in Turkey, those that come from Western Armenia. This is an example of, so again, when we say that all the records were destroyed, yes, to a large extent, except for some very limited cases, the Armenian church records were destroyed. You can find records from Bolis, from Istanbul. You can find some records, Armenian Catholic Church records from Mardin, from Ankara, from areas like that. In one Armenian church from the interior, from Gesaria, there are records from there. But if you go to the Ottoman archives, you'll find things like this. And this is early Ottoman census record for the village that I spoke about earlier, Sakrat, in the village of Palu, where my grandfather was from. And I've been able to identify my family in this, even though it's 1840, and I don't always know exactly how the relationship exists. I can clearly identify the household. It's only men that are listed here, and I'm going to run through this household number 9 because this is my family's household. I know this from a memoir one of my grandfather's cousins wrote, and he talked about the family history, and he said that our family used to be known as Nersessian. This is what he said. He said, our ancestor Asadur, in 1840, when the Ottoman government came to the village and they needed somebody that could read and write in Ottoman Turkish, our ancestor Asadur could do those, and he was chosen to do this for the government. And after that, he was known as Yazaji, writer, a writer, Asadur, Yazaji Asadur. And the family became known as Yazajan after that. Okay, this is the story in the book. What I found is in this household that this is Ohan, this is Nerses, son of Ohan. He's tall height, white beard, farmer, Çiftçi. Okay, so Ohan Oğlu, uzun boylu, aksakala, Çiftçi, and he was, in this case, 68 years old. Okay, he's the head of the household, and he was, this symbol here is his tax classification. He was middle income, EFSAT, middle income. He was the 37th male recorded in the village, and he's in the 9th household. And then the rest of the household, here's the Asadur that we know of. And why he was known as Nersessian? Because his father was Nerses. Asadur, and it says he's his son. He's also tall height, black mustache, and he was 24 years old, also middle. And this is the Haydabed. I'm descended from Haydabed. This is my ancestor. Haydabed, he was 9 years old. And then this is a grandson, Ohan, son of Asadur, age 4. And then this is a brother, it would be a brother of Ohan, and his name is Simo. So this is kind of what you see in an Ottoman census record of that time. The problem is trying to bridge the gap between there and what we know later. Okay, that's one thing. Second thing is that they will not grant access to more current census information, even though they exist. There was a population registers that were done in the 1906, 1907 time period. They would be tremendously valuable because it would be part of our consciousness, but we are not given access to that information. So let's look at what somebody can do, let's say. This is a family tree that was handed down to a family from Çemezkezek, the Miadun village of Çemezkezek. This is descendants of Bolhos, okay? And this village of Miadun had 40 households in 1840. Of those 40 households, 10 of them traced to this one family tree that I can trace to this one family tree, meaning 25% of the village at that time descends from this one family. And when we piece it together, okay, when we piece things together, here's the part of the household, one of the portions of that tree as it existed in the Ottoman census. So this is Sahag, son of Artin, and his brother Hovanes. Okay, and I've written it here. I found the same Hovanes marriage in the records of Aleppo, Syria. Okay, he married in 1894 in Aleppo, Syria. This village in Çemezkezek had a pipeline direct to Aleppo, economic pipeline, where the villagers would go back and forth. They were part of the garment industry in Aleppo. And if you look at this village of 40 households in 1840, none of them were farmers. It was like I've never seen anything like this. They were all in the garment industry, or there was one watchmaker, and their sustainability was entirely through their economic relationship with Aleppo. And then this is a child being born to that family. So when you put it together and you rebuild this family tree, here's a transcription of that tree above, that section of Sahag, Hovanes, and you look at how these things come together. And then you see Sahag and Hovannes, and you rebuild the tree. And that's how you can kind of put these sorts of things together from sources in Aleppo, Syria, and Turkey, and a family oral history that's been passed down. Let's look at another case that's actually kind of a big deal. And I have this article coming out soon in the next issue of the Armenian Review where I talk about this. Here's Jerusalem. Jerusalem is a special case, again, where the Armenian community, like Iran, existed for centuries before. Even though it's outside of the traditional Armenian homeland, the Armenian community existed well and prior. Here's some records that I transcribed from the Jerusalem church records, Armenian church records. I found the marriage, and this is a very early marriage, 1838, the marriage of this Toros Tavitian from Jerusalem himself, okay? And then he marries Sapruhi, okay? Zakarian, who's the daughter of Hovannes, also from Jerusalem, okay? Look at the ages, though, 17 and 12. Interestingly, married very young. Now, these are all baptisms I found for this family. And you can see how the different ways the father was identified and the mother was identified in these records. But these are their children being born. And then the funeral of Toros, he died in 1883 at the age of 75. Okay. And so this is you get a picture of this household over, a long period of time from Armenian church records. Well, guess what? In this case, we actually do have access to the Ottoman population registers right up until 1915 because they're in the Israeli state archives, not in the Turkish archives. So because they're in the Israeli archives, we have access to two different population registers. This is an early one that would have been done around in the 1880s. And we see this exact same household. Toros, son of the tailor Hagop, okay? And then, the tailor Hagop, son of Toros, Hovannes, son of Toros, Artin, son of Toros, and Kevork, son of Toros, where if you go back, you can see these are the children that you're seeing being born here. Artin is Haruchun right here. Hovannes is here, right? So you see these children baptismal records, and then you see how they are in the Ottoman register. And in this case, by this time they are recording women, so the population registers are even more important, right? Now, if you go to the later population registers, that's what these look like. And these are even more complex because in these columns here, it's right to left you're reading. In these columns here, it's identifying where they're listed in a birth register, a marriage register, a death register. And if you go to those registers, you'll find the same family being recorded. So now you can this is the register, and you can rebuild this family tree. You can just imagine what is possible for this one family based on Armenian church records and in government records, and how it comes all together in ways we never would have imagined. Okay, I never would have imagined that I could find my family in an Ottoman census record that would take my family back to the 1700s. And if your family comes from Hayastan, you have Armenian church records that go back to the early 1800s. You have census records as well. Although the Russian census from 1899, that would be really valuable. The all Russian census, the actual registers for that census are not, they're not available. We don't know. Maybe they were destroyed, which would have been really valuable because the regions of Kars, Ardahan, those regions would have been included in that census, right? And we don't have any other information for those areas. So that would have been, if we can find them, it would be really valuable. All we have is the published books, summaries of those censuses, but not the registers themselves. And then there are post-genocide records like this that are really valuable as well. This is and again, think about my family. So the one place where there are Armenian church records from the interior that I was talking about is this Subkrikor Lusavorich church from Gesaria, where it existed as a church after the genocide. In fact, it's still controlled by the patriarch, and once or twice a year, they still hold mass there. This is the baptisms that took place there in the 1940s. This is an example of it. And in this case, my other grandfather's village, Burun Kushla in the Yozgat region, the Armenians still lived there into the 1940s and 50s after the genocide. And what did I find? Again, an Aghjayan family from Burun Kushla being baptized in the 1930s, 1940s, must be my family, has to be my family. Don't know. The descendants haven't been able to find them yet. But through these records, I learned that these were survivors. And I'm going to talk a little bit about it more of how do we make these connections now. For those of you that, and in the end, right, this, I'm looking and I'm saying, how do I find, we all have these stories of family members, whether you're from Hayastan, from Lebanon, from Iran, it doesn't matter. There's still roots to this of our family history being separated, right? And having family members that have been presumed killed, but we don't know. They may have survived. If they were children, they may have survived. If they were women, they may have been taken in and forced into marriage. Remember, I talked about those growing up in Turkey, right? And this is what I'm going to end on. And I want to talk about this more so you understand better the example I'm talking about. How would I find these people? How would I reconnect? And today we have another resource available to us, DNA testing. And this is something that is a tremendous resource to Armenians for finding, because let's say my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, was one of 5 girls. Okay. She had 4 sisters during the genocide. My grandmother survived. She was a child, 8 years old. She survived as a slave to a Muslim family for 6 years before one sister who had survived elsewhere found her and rescued her, and she was able to escape. Okay. But the other 3 sisters, one we know of had died. The other 2 went on the march to the Syrian desert. One was an infant and one was a teenage girl. Both of them, the exact demographic that would have potentially survived. The infant left on the side of the road, or the teenage girl forced into marriage. Okay. And I travel those lands all the time. Since 1996, I've been traveling through Western Armenia, and I would meet hundreds of those descended from women exactly like that, children exactly like that. And they would not know enough to be able to connect, but they knew they were Armenian. And that's even after 100 years of all incentive to lose that identity, economic hardship, discrimination, threat of death. They retained that tie to their Armenian identity. They knew their grandmother was Armenian or their mother was Armenian, and they wanted to find their Armenian families, to know that they weren't forgotten, that they hadn't been forgotten. And until now, we've considered those missing women and their descendants as part of the 1.5 million killed. And they considered themselves that way. And how are you going to connect those families when all they know is that their mother was, her parents' names were Garabed and Anna, and they were from Karpet, and we'd never be able to do it. DNA testing is the way that can be done. Okay, that connection. And I'm not going to go into the details because I'm running out of time and I want to talk more. But the important point here is, let's leave this aside. You're getting DNA, everybody knows you get DNA from half your DNA from your mother, half your DNA from your father. They got half of theirs from their parents. How that comes down to you, though, is different. In this example of showing a child where one of the ones they got from their mother all came from one grandfather. This is just an example, right? The one they got from their mother came from all from one grandfather, none from the grandmother. And the other side, the father's DNA, it came from a mix of the grandmother and grandfather. And this is why your siblings and you have different DNA. And if you're trying to match to your cousins, there's a different range of how much DNA you can share with your relatives. And this chart is a way of explaining that, okay? One way of explaining it. So if you look at first cousins, right? The way DNA works, the way you're going to come back and it's going to say, how much DNA do you share with somebody? And the measurement is given is in centimorgans. And in cases of known first cousins, the range you would see is what has been seen in samples from all known first cousins is that the range would be between 553 and 1200, right? With an average of 874. Now you can see how quickly it dissipates with each generation, and this is why it's even more critical. But second cousins, the range is from 46 to 515, and it's average of 233. Third cousins might not even show a relationship. but on average would have something in the range of 74 and so on. Another way to look at this is, let's say you come back with somebody that matches you at 100 shared centimorgans. 5% of the time, that person would be a second cousin to you. Almost 40% of the time, it would be second cousin once removed, and then third cousins 30% of the time, and so on, right? So this is another way of kind of analyzing it. So when you don't know. So what happens? I DNA test, right? Because I want to find out if my grandmother's sisters survived, and I might be able to find it, right? So that's my purpose. That's what I tried to do. For the first 2 years, I had no matches, no close matches, right? They were all fourth or fifth cousins, and they were diasporans. They didn't come from the same village. They had no idea of their history. We couldn't connect. It wasn't even worth the effort of trying to figure it out. In 2015, I came back from one of my trips to Turkey, where I was an election monitor for their elections that were taking place in 2015. And I just traveled around their Zim region. I get back, and all of a sudden there's a match to me, and it's a close match. So now, before this, all the people that were matching me were in the range of 40, under 40, right? This person matched me at 400, and it was a Turkish name and somebody from Turkey. Okay, so if you look at 400, you're talking about 75% of the time they're going to be a first cousin once removed to me. 25% of the time, second cousins, right? This is somebody clearly very closely related to me. I reach out to them. They come back to me, and luckily he spoke English. It was the son of the man that they tested. He was a physician in Western Turkey, and this is the story he told me. His grandmother, who they knew she was Armenian. During the genocide, her and her older sister were on the march, and a cavalry officer saw the older sister and wanted to marry her. And she said, "I'll only go with you if you take the younger sister and protect her as well." He agrees. The older sister has a son by this man. The son dies young. The older sister dies soon thereafter, leaving the younger sister alone. The younger sister, Kurdish man, comes to the house. He falls in love with her. They marry, have 3 kids. He passes away. She marries his brother, so the kids don't grow up without a father. 3 more kids. And this man that DNA tested was a son from the second marriage. And I'm like, this is my grandmother's story exactly. This is exactly her story. This is her sisters. I found her sisters, and I'm through the moon. I asked him, do you know her name? He says her name was Muslima. I said, no. Do you know what her Armenian name was? He says, yes, Vaskanush. Well, Vaskanush was not the name of either of my maternal grandmother's sisters. So now I'm thinking to myself, okay, so who is this then that's so closely related to me? I said, do you know anything more? He says, yes. He says, her parents' names were Antrias and Anna. Antrias and Anna only occurs in my family in one place. My great-grandmother, who I knew growing up, she lived the last 3 years of her life with my family in Rhode Island, and she died when I was 13 years old, so I knew her very well, actually. I have very fond memories of my great-grandmother. That was her parents' names, Antrias and Anna. This was her sister that my family knew nothing about. She had another sister that survived and came to the United States. My great-grandmother was already living in Diapaget at the time, and already my grandmother was born. She already had a family, and they survived the march from from Diapaget to Aleppo. I don't know if she knew if her sister had survived or not, but this was her sister's family. And I've been able to reconnect with my family. Um, this is me and my cousin at the grave of my great-grandmother's sister in 2019 when I made the trip, and my cousin and I traveled from Antalya to Van and back again. And one of the trips I wanted to make was to my great-grandmother's sister's grave. And so there's an interesting side story to this, is that my family were the blacksmiths and farriers in Diapaget and in Maden, where my family was from. And so I was looking at a book about the Armenians of Maden, of Bakr Maden, after I found this family. And I started to think, well, maybe, again, it was one of these patronymic surnames, Antriasyan, and my great-grandmother's father's name was Antrias. And I said, well, maybe she just went by Antriasyan for that. And maybe instead they were really Nalbanyan, the farriers, because they were farriers. So I look in the back of the book, and there's a section on occupations. And under the section on Nalbans, wouldn't you know it, the first 2 paragraphs are about my family. And they were actually Antriasyan even at that time. And In there, this name Vaskanush, which I had never known, my family never heard this name before. In there is written in the book, it says, the mother, a son Chachadur, which we had never known there was a sister, never mind a brother, and the youngest sister Vaskanush were thrown in the Euphrates River and killed. That's what they thought had happened to them. Again, they were counted as part of the dead, part of the 1.5 million, not part of those that survived. And now I have my cousins, and believe me, that Armenian identity that in them is so strong. It's so powerful, and our relationship is so strong. We knew the same people because I had been traveling there so often. When we visited the village, there was an Armenian woman, that last Armenian woman living in the village. And I always, when I'm in that village, that town, Chunkush, I always want to go see her. And when we're driving up to the house, my cousin goes to me, oh, my aunt and uncle live next door. And all those times, every year when I was going to visit this woman, the people next door always came out. Like, what are these people from the United States always going to this woman's house? Who is she that she has these visitors? But they never said that they were Armenian and that they had Armenian relatives or anything like that. When we get out of the car that day, what a family reunion we had that day. Let me tell you, the two families that in all that time, I never would have known my own relatives were next door if not for this DNA testing. So again, when we talk about why we do this, why it's important, this is the woman and my cousin talking to her that time. It's a wonderful picture. Um, and she had a powerful message that day as well. And her message, she just passed away now. And unfortunately, her daughter passed away as well. But they've been searching for their relatives. I DNA tested her before she passed away. And we're very close to finding her relatives. We know where they're from. Hore, a village in Kharpet region, and we know that they're related to this Aslanyan family, but we're still trying to link it together exactly. But that's why DNA is important, and that's why genealogy, Armenian genealogy is important, because what we did here is we brought two back from the dead, 1.5 million minus two, and they're part of our family, and they don't want to be forgotten, and they don't want to be left behind. And until now, that's the way we've viewed them, and they've been forced to view themselves. So with that, I think that's enough. It's probably, I even went a little bit too long, sorry. Well, it's pretty close, 50 minutes from when I started, so not too bad. I try and be pretty good about it. So I hope that inspires you to understand not only what's possible, what potentially is possible, but why it's important to do it and how you can be of help in doing that. That's the message I want you to walk away with.
Thank you so much, Mr. Aghjayan, for an amazing presentation. Um, Now, if you guys have questions, just raise your hand and I'll just call on you and you can ask your question. And if you prefer to type it, that's also fine. And yeah, so I guess I'll initiate with one question. Mr. Aljan, so it's a little bit hard to process all of this at once. So where does someone start, you think,
Yeah.
if they want to
It is
research?
overwhelming. And I know I threw a lot of information at you, rapid fire. And I didn't even go over all the possibilities. I'm just trying to open your eyes that things are not. So, first of all, you got to start with your family. Okay. Look, records persist, people die. You got to talk to your family. And even if they don't know, you got to learn everything they can know, relatives, whatever. There's always usually somebody in the family that is like the family historian, somebody that has had an interest. It may be a peripheral cousin. It may not be in your direct family. Like in my family, you can imagine, right? I'm that person, right? So even my cousin's kids, second cousin, third cousin, whatever, right? They're going to reach out to me. So talk to people first, document what they can. Everybody you can talk to, right? That's the first step, right? And gather as much information right there. Second, once you have that and you can start exploring, there's usually books about those villages. Important to read those books, right? Learn more about them. Start searching the records, family search, ancestry, whatever. But post your question. Post your question on the Facebook group. That's a great way to start. This is what I know. What can you tell me? And then somebody's going to point you in a direction, right? They're going to say, well, my family was in Lebanon. Well, the Lebanese records are available, dating back to even Sup Nishan Church back to the 1860s. The records are available for that church, right? Or Aleppo, Syria, they'll tell you what's available. Cairo or Hayastan, sometimes, I had a researcher at the RF archives. He was a researcher there, and we were talking. I asked him where his family's from. He was from Javach. And while we're sitting there, within 5 minutes, I found a baptismal record for his family from the 1870s online, like literally 5 minutes it took me to find it. Right. So posting on there is a great way for people to give you direction so that then you can do things. And then DNA test your oldest relatives first, right? Again, the DNA, I showed you how it dissipates very quickly. So, and DNA testing cousins, one of the ways I've been really helped in triangulating my results. Recently, I had a Turkish kid from Texas, right? He's a high school student in Texas, right? And he shows up as a match to me. And his family's there, whatever. They know that he knew his great-great-grandmother was an Armenian that was left behind during the genocide. Usually I wouldn't explore such a relationship because it was too distant, but it turns out that this great-great-grandmother's daughter, his great aunt, is still alive in Turkey. And I said, okay, wait a minute. Now I left a DNA kit with my cousin over there. So I had him mail it to this family. And she took the test, mailed it to the kid in Texas. He puts it in, and her results come out that she's a second cousin with my father and his first cousin. Like that. That's how close the relationship is. And so, because I had tested my father, his first cousins, me, and my second cousins, I was able to triangulate the results much better. When you look at that chart I showed you, right now, instead of having just one data point, if any of you are math people, you understand a sample size of 1 is not a very big sample size, right? But if you broaden that sample size, now you get a better picture. So DNA test, talk to relatives first, DNA test those older relatives, including peripheral, first cousin, second cousin, great aunts, whatever, and then start asking questions to those that can help you, like in the genealogy group, and then they'll point you in directions where you can go depending on where your family was from.
Thank you. So, Mari, you have a question?
Hi. So thank you so much for your presentation. I just wanted to know what your opinion was on the different DNA companies, because there are so many to choose from, and I don't really know.
Excellent question.
I don't have like endless amounts of money to try them all. So I was wondering which one you would recommend to start out with.
Fantastic question. I glossed over that, and I'm really glad I skipped over the different DNA testing companies. There was one slide in there. So the answer to that question is the best. You know which one's the best? The best is the one where you find your relatives, and it depends on where they tested, and you can't know that, right? So to do it in the most economical way, right? You want to do this economically, right? My recommendation is to test at ancestry.com, because at Ancestry you can download your results and they're accepted at some of the other companies for free. So you test at one company and you get an Ancestry's database, then you download and you upload it to Family Tree DNA for free, MyHeritage DNA for free, and GEDmatch, which is a third-party site where you can upload from any of the sites, right? And you'll get in 4 databases with the cost of one test. And when they're on sale, it might only be $50 or $59, right? The only database you'd be missing at that point, major database, I'm not going to say the only database, the only major database you're missing at that point is 23andMe. Now, you can do the same exact thing with 23andMe, by the way. You can test there and download and upload. The reason I say Ancestry is my experience with 23andMe is, and again, I found close relatives at all of them. Okay, I found close relatives at all of them. But my experience with 23andMe is some people test there solely for the health reports that they market as like it's like a health report thing you can get. And those people don't care about genealogy at all. So I don't always find that they're responsive when I'm reaching out to them. Ancestry, I kind of like. Sometimes a lot of the people have their family tree already up there. So when you look at the link, you even get a family tree and you can see like where their Armenian family is, So that's why I kind of lean that way. It's a bigger database as well. So I think, that's why I say over 23andMe. And then all you have to to do is test a 23andMe if you want to later. If you find that you don't have any close matches at the other sites and you're desiring and have the money, you can do that one. But that's the way to do it. And really the best is the one where you find your family. And I'll tell you what I did. I tested at Family Tree DNA first because the Armenian DNA project is there. And I thought to myself, oh, if somebody from Turkey is interested in their Armenian roots, they might be drawn to that testing site for that reason. And in fact, that's what happened. My cousins, cousins tested there for that reason. But that's not the answer. The answer is tested ancestry, upload to Family Tree DNA. And that way you're in more than one database and paying only the price of one.
Thank you.
See a hand from Gabriel.
Gabriel, if you want to answer. If you want to ask, I mean.
Hi, yeah, I was just wondering if you have any tips for doing research if you don't read or speak Armenian.
Again, I think that the genealogy group helps with that a lot of times. The people there will translate for you. It's amazing how giving that community is of 15,000. People are so willing to help at no price, no cost, whatever. They do it of their own desire to, an excitement when somebody finds something, the group excitement of helping. So that's my my hope. I don't know where your family's from, but again, some of the records may be in English for you, depending on where your family's from. And outside of that, you're gonna just need help. Look, my Armenian, you would think that my Armenian is great. It's not. It just so happens that I can read, handwritten Armenian pretty well. And for this purpose, I don't have to be entirely fluent. Even the Ottoman census records, I read to you myself. I didn't know how to read Arabic script before, 5 years ago, I started to learn how. So in the last 5 years, I picked up how to read these records through practice. So, and over time, you would be able to learn how to do that as well. Learning an alphabet and learning how to, what's a record? It's really names. So it's really just being able to read. And the more you work with the record, the better you're able to read. I know a lot of English only speakers now that are getting fairly adept at reading Armenian, through practice and seeing, understanding how the records are. Sometimes I'm better at reading these handwritten than a fluent Armenian speaker because they're not used to reading this kind of archival records, So, but start there. The genealogy Facebook group, great place to start.
All right, thank you.
And Vanna?
Hi, thank you so much. I'm just wanting to know if you have any information or know how I can access information for some of the orphanages that were in Greece, for example. My father was an orphan and I can't find anything on him at all. I have extensive family on my mother's side, but on my father's side, I can't find anything.
Where did he marry?
He married I'm in Canada. They married in Canada and he was in the army. And for 2 years now, I've been waiting for his army records. And I don't know when his name was changed either, if it was before the army or in the army. There's 2 stories that are going around about him, but he was one of the original Georgetown boys. That was, yeah. Yeah.
So do you have the book on the Georgetown boys?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And so do you have by the way, my great-grandmother and grandmother, the one I talked about in that story, they were 2 of the Georgetown girls, the ones brought over as servants. And my family didn't know that story either. So the United Church of Canada has records on these. Did you get the dossier? Did you get the dossier on him? So that will have some interesting information. Most of those boys came from Corfu, right?
Yes.
They came from the orphanage in Corfu. I don't know if the records from usually my experience with the orphanage records is you really only get kind of name, maybe you get a village, maybe a name, maybe, at best, even the Near East Relief Orphanage records, you just don't, it's more about the food they ordered, how much, like logistics. It's not about, the family backgrounds of these orphans that were kept there. But you might be able to find something in okay, so he was brought over so it's very early. Yeah, I would start with that Church, United Church of Canada, like
Okay.
the dossier on him, and see what
Okay.
it has about the family in there, and then see. And if you want, um, I was just going to say you can write an email to me if you want, and we can continue this conversation. But if you tell me who your father's name and whatever who I'm looking for, I'll
Okay.
see. I can poke around a little bit and see what I can
Thank you.
find.
Thank you.
Do you know where he was from originally? What village, town?
I think it was around Erzurum.
Okay. So it'll be
Yeah.
important to learn that, and the probably the dossier will give you that information.
Okay.
But it would be good to get the marriage record. What parents he listed, the names of his parents that he
Mm.
put on the marriage record. That would be good to get. You should get it regardless of what it
Okay.
says. Did he marry in the Armenian church, or was it because a lot of those guys didn't? So did he marry it?
My mom was Armenian. My mom was Armenian, but we didn't have an Armenian church. I think they got married in the Anglican church in Hamilton.
Right. So I don't know what those records would be like, but at
Yeah.
least getting the civil record would be worth it. The civil record would have
Okay.
information, and then combine that with the dossier.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Is your email on this presentation?
So my email is actually my grandfather's village at gmail.com. So it's Sakrat Palu, SAKRAT PALU
Mhm.
at gmail.com. So you can reach me there. If you have trouble, just ask Arman and he can get it to you.
Okay, thank you.
If you need it, through Facebook, I'll send you the email.
Sure. Oh, you've sent me your email. I can just send it in the chat right now.
Yeah, so you can get it from him as well.
Perfect,
So,
thank you.
of course.
I got it.
Perfect. You typed it, huh? My fingers aren't working today.
It's all good. So, it looks like there's no more questions. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. You still can ask if you got something.
If you
But
think
if
of it
not,
down the road, I'm trying to, right?
Yeah.
I'm always, doesn't have to be today.
yeah, for sure. I hope this sparked a lot of people's interest in ancestry research, taught them a lot of things. I for sure learned many things from Mr. Aghjayan. Thank you to everybody who came, and thank you especially to Mr. Aghjayan for hosting, for delivering such a wonderful lecture.
Thank you. For the future now, it's George, okay? I don't go by. I'm not. George is fine. Okay.
Absolutely.
So thank you all. Have a good
Of course.
rest of the day.
And the recording will be available later. Everyone have a great day.
Thank you too.